notre réunion publique annuelle de la Société des musées de sciences et technologies du Canada. I would also like to welcome the people that are joining us on our live broadcast over the internet. So if you saw the technical difficulties we're having, it's because we're having problems putting our English slides on the internet. So people will be treated all in French over the internet right now. So sans plus tarder, j'aimerais inviter notre chairman, M. Gary Baldesky, à nous dire quelques mots. Merci.
Thank you, Geneviève. Bonjour. Il me fait grand plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue. If I was one of my grandchildren, I could do the rest of this in French, but that's about as far as the kid from Thunder Bay gets. So with your permission, I'll kind of do this in English. And I would like to just acknowledge that it has been a tumultuous year for our museums. The Agricultural Museum is off to, with its new learning center, the Aviation Museum with the Living in Space exhibition, which will lead to the Star Trek extravaganza starting in May. And of course, with the Science and Technology Museum, we were blessed with mold, which turned into asbestos, and with ceilings that came crashing down. So you might think, well, that's a disaster. But you know, every spore sort of apparently has its silver lining. And the disaster led to $250 million, which actually came together yesterday in its second iteration. And so, as you would expect, these are particularly exciting times. And Alex will be going into that in more detail. I'd just like to conclude my remarks by thanking people. I'd like to thank the Minister, Minister Jolie, who has been spectacularly supportive, and her staff, and our own staff, and of course the $250 million kid himself, Alex Binet, and it's time to hear from him. So Alex, over to you. Merci.
Thanks, Gary. A few million short of $250 million, but we're working on it. So merci beaucoup d'être ici cet après-midi. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I have a few slides to go through with you. I'm used to walking around with my clicker and moving around and stuff, so I feel kind of contained here in front of the camera. So I'm going to apologize in advance if this is a little wonky. But we'll start off by talking about who we are briefly, because we have quite a few people from McGill here. And since we're an Ottawa-based institution, not that we're competing between Ottawa and Montreal, because the Habs would win that every day anyways. Then let's just tell you a little bit about who we are. So we're 3 national museums. Dr. Polonsky mentioned that we are the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum, which is one of the only, if not the only, working farm in a nation's capital, anywhere in the world, has hundreds of animals, has historic artifacts on some of Canada's first pioneers and some agricultural culture. We also on a également le Musée de l'Aviation et de l'Espace, qui est un CNN top 10 au monde, qu'on n'est pas assez fiers de promouvoir de la sorte, mais c'est vraiment un des meilleurs musées de l'aviation et de l'espace au monde, qui est juste à l'extérieur du centre-ville d'Ottawa. Puis on a également le Musée de sciences et technologies, tel que Gary a mentionné, qui est cédulé pour réouvrir en novembre 2017. On time and on budget, and to a whole bunch of rave reviews, and the team's pretty excited about all the work that we're doing on the relaunch of that particular institution. We're going to be resetting the bar for what's possible. 2 years to tear walls down, bring the walls back up, and do 90,000 square feet of exhibition is not something we're accustomed to in North America, and it's something that the team is on target for achieving, and we're extremely proud of that. So 3 national museums. If you were to look at us by the numbers, we reached over 170 countries in the last few years. We do a bunch of historically accurate mobile games. We have over 100 live animals, hundreds of thousands of artifacts, and we are also one of Canada's top science communications shops in the sense that we've reached about 14 million Canadians in the past year, and we're extremely proud of that as well. So that's who we are by the numbers. Au Musée de l'agriculture et de la nourriture, depuis la dernière année, on a été capable de relancer une nouvelle exposition sur la préservation de la nourriture, The Science You Eat. We were able also to speak to and launch an exhibition on Canadian veterinarians caring for war horses in the past year as well. So we also have year-round public and school programming that teach the children about the foods and the products that we produce here in Canada from an agricultural perspective. Oh, you can keep clicking through this, Kao. Great. Now at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum, on a eu l'opportunité depuis la dernière année, so just keep clicking right through. Too much animation in the slides, that's okay. Au Musée de l'Aviation et du Canada, on a été en position de renouveler la plupart de nos expositions ou de renouveler beaucoup de textes sur le plancher. On a été capable de célébrer le centenaire de la Première Guerre mondiale aussi. Puis on a été capable de faire l'acquisition et puis l'exposition de nouvelles avions sur le plancher. Donc ça a été une année très intéressante. On the next slide, we also launched, from our perspective, Canada's first mobile game where we were able to take history. So we 3D scanned all the aircraft on the floor, down to the rivet, and made people fly through structures and artifacts, structures and pylons and shoot bubbles. So it was good. It was a good first attempt at getting history to merge with digital technology and to see what came of it. So that was our first launch in 13-14, and we will talk a little bit later about some of the innovative work that we'll be doing to pursue this kind of history and cultural engagement with digital natives and youth, frankly, anybody that plays video games. Au Musée des sciences et tech, comme que Gary a mentionné, on a fermé en septembre 2014. Never waste a good crisis, as Winston Churchill would have once said. So we've been busy doing quite a few things for the relaunch, which we'll speak to a little bit later. But prior to the closure, we were able to participate in the Ottawa Maker Fair. We ran a whole bunch of summer camps. We are probably one of the museums in Canada that has the most outreach, the largest amount of outreach programs, and does the largest amount of youth engagement as well. So we were able to continue that tradition prior to the closure. And had just launched an exhibition on big data as well prior to mold. And I'm not a chemist, but I've been told that Stachybotrys is the most aggressive, fastest growing mold spore type there is out of 104,000 types of mold. And that's what hit us in September 2014, which forced us to close, unfortunately. But luckily, with the help of the Government of Canada, we've been able to relaunch, or in the process of relaunching the museum with an $80.5 million capital injection, so we are well on our way for that. However, after closing, what was interesting is when you no longer have a box to think in, because you literally don't have a box anymore, interesting things can happen. So we were able to actually continue our outreach into the community. We crammed all of our programs into a car and started traveling anywhere that this car could go to. So it's called Museums on the Go, Science Mobile to schools, libraries, community events, and it's gone extremely well in the process. We've been able to increase our traveling exhibition programs as well as a result of not having to necessarily have a box to run the Science and Tech Museum in. We've been able to get out across Canada. So Echoes in the Ice, after the finding of the Franklin Bell, for example, and other things, has been traveling across the country. It was at Library and Archives Canada and has been traveling across Western Canada for the last year. On a également été capable de faire un atelier sur Minecraft. Again, this concept of trying to take science and history to youth. Any of you that have children in the room of a certain age will know that they spend a lot of time on Minecraft, which is actually a good game to be on, frankly. So we were able to do workshops at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum run by the Science and Tech Museum. On this workshop in particular was in collaboration with kids from Peru, Alaska, Sudbury. They got to build a space shuttle together, threw out a bunch of space artifacts on the floor so they got to see the real thing. They got to create their space shuttle on Minecraft to launch up into Mars and go mine some asteroids, I should say, sorry. So, and in typical youth fashion, we were able to sort of supervise to make sure their interactions. It's quite fascinating to see youth interact across the various countries in South America and North America and see how exactly, very similar they can be actually in some of their interactions, and I will spare you the colorful commentary. From a corporation perspective, on a été également capable de lancer une initiative for greening of the enterprise as well, so we've been able to continue the trend of going greener. As some of you may know, yesterday we had an announcement of a $156 million collection reserve facility, which will be state-of-the-art and continue the tradition, the pattern that we have of making our buildings greener and more efficient and sustainable. So we have also been able to continue down that trend from a corporate perspective, even though one of our 3 museums has been closed. On the next slide is where we talk about really starting to look at how digital culture and heritage institutions such as ours and science museums, because we're a bit of a weird mix of all of those things combined at the Canada Science and Technology Museums Corporation, and really sort of launch into the open heritage sort of movement. So we were able to launch the app, as I talked about. Our national collection database is online fully. One of the first to be able to do that. We were able to be the first national museum on Google Cultural Institute, for example. So it's a question of trying to get our content, which we sit on tremendous amounts of content, whether it's archives or artifacts, out in the public in a way that's accessible. And the easiest and most efficient way of doing that is obviously online. So we've also been able to continue renewing the museum's 3 websites on the next slide, as well as the corporation's foundation's website. So we've also hosted a series on the next slide of Google Hangouts, from meeting some of the new lambs at the farm, for example, which was one of the more popular ones, to aviation and space hangouts as well. On a également été capable de lancer une série de vidéos sur YouTube qui traite de différents sujets scientifiques, qui varient de comment créer un télescope à, encore une fois, passer un peu de temps avec certains animaux sur la ferme. Sur la prochaine diapositive, on a eu notre première initiative aussi à faire du crowdfunding. Donc, on a été capable de lever des fonds pour faire un projet de oral history with some of our World War II aviation veterans, for example. So we dabbed into the crowdfunding space as well, something that we had not done before. So it was a year of firsts, for sure. From an educational partnership perspective with universities, which we'll be speaking to a little bit later on, some of the work that we'll be launching together as McGill and the museum, is built on, this isn't something that's come out of the blue, we've been able to actually develop a lot of partnership with community colleges and universities. So some of their veterinary technology students, for example, coming in from Algonquin College, the aircraft maintenance students are also operating on some of our historical artifacts and some of our engines. University students are involved in a series of new exhibitions, local university students in Ottawa, and we've got curators that are teaching and lecturing at local universities and colleges. So we are today going to be building on that history and on that track record of success of community and post-secondary engagement in a big way. And I won't steal all of Jason's thunder necessarily, but I'll steal a little bit of it. So on that note, however, so that was the past year. We'll talk about the next year in a little bit. But before we do that, I'd like to invite Fern Prue, who's our Chief Operating Officer, to come up and spend a few minutes talking about our fiscal situation. But not before I thank the Government of Canada for its support in the 13-14 fiscal year. So thank you, 14-15 fiscal year, apologies, and thank you very much for the successful year that we've had and your support in that.
All right, thanks, Alex. Next slide, we got the financials. There we go. Just give you a little synopsis on what the financial situation was. And again, we're looking at the fiscal year 14-15, which ended almost a year ago. By the time we get the financial statements done and approved, they have to be tabled in Parliament before we can make them public. So that's why it takes a little bit of a delay before we can actually get and start sharing the news that we do have. As you've heard, it's been a very active year for us, reshaping the operational model, financial model around a museum that became closed without walls, creating a whole new model for us to do some financial planning. So on looking at the bright side of some of the occurrences that happened, the closure of the museum happened in November, which is right after the tourist season, cyclical business. So all the revenue, the peak revenue season came through. We got the revenues coming through before all the expenses kind of normally happen, with less revenues to go against. So the attendance for that year was very solid year. We've shown 2-year growth at the Aviation Museum and the Agriculture and Food Museum. The programs are really ils prennent de l'ampleur. C'est excellent de voir le développement, l'évolution des musées. Mais avec la fermeture du musée de sciences et technologies, on a pu atteindre 2,2 millions d'admissions. Other revenues include farm operations. As we mentioned, we do operate. We have animals at the farm. We actually have a milk quota. and we sell our milk to the Milk Marketing Board and actually generate revenues from our farm operations. So that's part of the other revenues that are, you can see up there. The other part of the other revenues are parking and museum memberships. So that's the other revenues. The commercial operations, like most museums, we have a retail, facility rentals, not as eloquent as this building here to rent the facilities, but we do actually host groups for weddings and other events within, and we generate some revenues from that for a total of $4.898 million. We also have supporting revenues through partnerships. Sponsorship, our sponsorship group is really doing well. They're now fully anchored in where we're going with the vision of the museum, and our partnership growth. Our sponsorships are accelerating rather nicely with a record high of $1.372 million coming through for us. For an institution of our size, it's something we can be proud of. All museums across Canada, that we are now in the top tiers of generating museum contribution and sponsorship revenues. We also have a foundation that works with us for scientific contributions and donations, which contributed a little over $200,000 last year towards the museum's activity, for a total revenue of $7.028 million. On the expense side, as you can see, the expenses can be shifted in different ways. What we have here is based on activities, museum activities, collecting, sharing knowledge. So the heritage preservation includes the historical, curatorial, collections management part of the work. So that activity, we invested $4.1 million into it last year. The sharing knowledge includes the exhibitions, the websites, the communicating, the education programs. That investment was $13.6 million. Our support activities include the administration, finance, government, governance, the IT infrastructure, for an investment of $6.5 million, and the accommodations is basically, as you may have heard, we received some funding for our leases. We're leasing buildings, or property tax, utilities, everything we need to run the facilities of the museum on all our sites, including 19 different buildings across the city. Costs $13.4 million. For a total cost of $37.8 million. So with an operating loss of $30 million before government contributions. With government contributions of $31.6 million, we ended up with a small surplus of $883,000. That surplus goes into an equity account. We're not, as a Crown Corporation, we do get to keep our revenues. We're not a core government department. So that allows us to put some money aside to invest in the future programs, which is coming in very handy in the reestablishing of the Science and Technology Museum. So that, in a nutshell, is our financial picture. We had a very good year in 14-15, again, because the cycle of revenue is coming through. Completely different model of how we're operating science, la diffusion scientifique dans les écoles, dans la communauté, avec Sciences Mobiles. Donc, les différentes façons de pouvoir mettre notre message sur, pour nos visiteurs, avec les financements du gouvernement. Donc, c'est tout pour l'évolution science.
Great, so now I get the pleasure of talking to you about what's coming in 15-16, even though 15-16 is almost over. So let's talk about what we've been doing in the past year. So obviously we talked about relaunching the Science and Technology Museum. That's been, on time, on budget. We've got fabrication and design firms all over North America, really from US to Canada. One of them is here in Montreal. Partners are in place. The construction is going well. We have a roof now. Officially started on a roof, so we have roof and beams and posts, I guess, for now, and foundation. So it's coming along. It's going to be a busy year. We've also been able to launch our second game, which is called Ace Academy Black Flight. So after we launched the first one and realized that maybe we could do something with history and digital, we took a page out of our friends at HBO, I guess, and Band of Brothers or The Pacific, for any of you that watch those shows, and actually reenacted the lives of 5 Canadian pilots that flew in a squadron called Black Flight during World War I. So we actually took their war diaries and turned it into a video game that is now over 175 countries and 65,000 downloads, a little over 2 months since it's been launched. So people are actually consuming and using Canadian culture, Canadian knowledge, Canadian history online in a way that frankly, they may not even be realizing that they are. We've also been able to take our science and some of our artifacts in 3D format, so 3D printing and 3D scanning in a big way across most Comic-Cons across Canada. Why? Because science fiction and and science are actually related. As you can, if you're a Star Trek fan, a lot of the technology in Star Trek has found its way into our daily lives already. A few of them haven't, like teleporters and others, but I've been told that that's being worked on actively, so hoping that happens in my lifetime. We've also been able to host Food for Thought lectures with a series of professors and scientists from the University of Ottawa as well. So it's been a very active year. It's been a year where we've put a lot of pieces on the puzzle board to be more than a museum, more than a science center, but actually really morph into a knowledge institution and be able to talk future science and past history and trying to merge the two together, because they cannot be separated and should not be separated when you're talking to youths across the country. So ça a été une année, jusqu'à présent, extrêmement excitante. On a commencé à faire du live streaming pour justement la plupart de nos activités. Donc, quand on a des rencontres avec notre équipe à nous, ben, on a live stream à travers le pays, à travers le monde, dans le fond. Donc, ça, c'était quelque chose de nouveau pour nous aussi. On a créé un nouvel événement qui s'appelle Bacon Palooza, which is kind of stepping outside of our comfort zone. If you're the Agriculture and Food Museum, you're used to it being a very young audience. This was for bacon, bands, and beer. It was a huge success, and it's something that we'll be looking to repeat as well, to advertise and broadcast to the world that there are museums and there are things you could do even as young adults or as anybody liking bacon, frankly, in this case. Those are some of the highlights. On the next slide, some of the things that will be coming up in 2016, 2017. At the Agriculture and Food Museum, we will be launching an international food series. So every month will be a series of different food cultures. So we'll be looking at, probably my favorite first, hopefully, which is French food. We will be looking at Maple Month, Cheese Month, continuing down Bacon Palooza, but we'll also be looking at continuing the traveling exhibition of Taste of Science that's launched, or Food Science, I should say, that's launched across the country, that speaks to some of the food preservation and some of the food science behind some of the food you eat. At the Aviation and Space Museum, Gary alluded to it, and we will be the world premiere and the global launch of a new Star Trek exhibition in partnership with CBS called Starfleet Academy. So you will be able to go through Starfleet Academy and emerge a doctor, an engineer, a weapons specialist, and then do the Kobayashi Maru for those of you that follow Star Trek. And you will fail the test unless you are Captain Kirk, which also happens to be coming for our event and our global launch. So we're looking forward to that and celebrating the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. For Canada Science and Tech Museum, we will be launching a national traveling program called Game Changers. Ça va parler de la science et puis des mathématiques du domaine des arts qui nous aident à créer des jeux vidéo. La plupart de nos enfants jouent des jeux vidéo sans se rendre compte des mathématiques qui sont impliquées à créer un jeu. So this launches tonight, actually, in Ottawa with speakers from Algonquin and Carleton University and Algonquin College on the concepts of addiction to video games. And we're going to be talking about everything from science and math and the psychology behind video games, and with a 3,500 square foot traveling exhibition that will crisscross across the country, which is already booked for a year and a half, so it's a huge success for us. Obviously, 16-17 will continue with the relaunch of the Science and Tech Museum. 6 major galleries, a children's museum located inside the museum, which is all based on the concept of failing, and failing being acceptable and experimenting. The Science and Tech Museum will tell the story of how science and tech basically created Canada as a nation, from railroad to telegraph to medical sensations. And we'll be looking as well to launch our new future video game called Spaceborne, which is about the human colonization of our solar system. So really diving into the mining concepts, for example, of mining an asteroid, mining the planet Mars, what's required in colonizing Mars, working with institutions such as the Perimeter Institute and others in this video game on actually bringing science to gaming and youth. We will be launching in mid-May our climate change exhibition, but more on the sustainable technologies to help fight climate change in partnership with National Geographic in Ottawa at Lansdowne Park. We'll be traveling across the country, and right now we have a lot of interest from even other countries, which is great. So this is in partnership with Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. We're actively signing and pursuing agreements for 12 documentaries around the world as well, being co-produced on a variety of scientific topics, from the history of medicine to the future food source for the world, talking to institutions such as the Discovery Channel, the Smithsonian Channel. So we're really, again, this shift from museum, science center to a knowledge institution and using multiple mediums to be able to communicate the message. And we'll also be continuing to grow our national footprint of traveling exhibitions. So we've got quite a few things on the road, on the show, on our plates right now. Small team of 225 employees that are hitting home runs every time we turn the corner, which is absolutely fantastic. And as of yesterday, well, we now know that we will be able to get off the ground a state-of-the-art collection facility that will house our collection, the National Galleries collection, as well as the Canada Conservation Institute under one roof. That will be opening in 2018. Fern. 2019. Apologies, live streaming, I've been corrected on record. 2019, Fern just had a heart attack. Or he's okay. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about a big part of why we're here today at McGill, so thank you very much for hosting us. Historically, the museum had stopped a lot of its research, and now we're getting back into it. And research for us isn't just our folks getting the privilege of working with our collection, but it's actually opening up our collection to the rest of the country. And McGill was one of our first stops. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about, and again, we'll turn it over to Jason shortly, the McGill Fellowship in the History of Science, Medicine, and Technology collaborations and partnerships that we'll be striking between your institution and the museum. So we collect and preserve Canada's scientific and cultural heritage, and we disseminate it. And McGill provides a broad range of outstanding learning and research program to prepare students as citizens and leaders who will make a difference. So why not combine the two together? So today I'm here to announce that we will be collaborating with McGill to establish the McGill Fellowship in the History of Science, Medicine, and Technology for the next few years to come, and hopefully build this partnership together. So we're really excited about this because the fellows that we'll be announcing today will contribute to the body of research of our museums. Yes, that's certainly the selfish side of that equation, but it'll also help to the fellows' research that's going to be published by McGill and the museum, and our museum is going to receive McGill objects and archives that are worthy of preservation in the national collection as well. So we're going to be strengthening our ties quite extensively over the next few years together. I know some of our curators that are here today are excited because McGill is ranked among some of Canada's top 4 research universities, so something to be extremely proud of. We may take a bit of heat over this back when we get back home in Ottawa, but that's great, that's fine. It's a national collection, and Montreal is a big part of our history, and so is McGill. So I'm pleased to announce that the first 2 fellows are Cynthia Tang, who's a PhD student in the Department of Social Studies of Medicine, and her field of study is the history of medicine. And Hassan Umut is a PhD student in the Institute of Islamic Studies, and his field of study is the history of science in Islamic society and the history of astronomy. So we look forward to working with Cynthia and Hassan, who will be supervised both by Brian DeWalt, who's our director of the curatorial division, and by David Pantaloni, who is our curator in physical science and medicine. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Jason. If you'd like to come and join me, and I'll turn the mic over to you. So thank you very much again for hosting us today, and we look forward to working a lot more closely with McGill in the years to come.
Thanks very much. I'd like to start with a sincere thank you framed in an apology. So let me explain. I've been in the field of higher education, teaching at university or college level for 13 years. And for 12 and a half of those years, I really did not run anything. I was not responsible for running anything institutionally really to any great extent. And those 12 and a half years were glorious. They were really wonderful. I could entirely focus on my own academic career and teaching, and that was really great. That very sheltered institutional and moral space allowed me to be lazy with, or sort of just complacent with how institutional structures take form. It allowed me, even in certain times that I feel very embarrassed about, to complain about the slow pace of institutional changes, about the slow pace, how difficult it was to complete bureaucratic tasks, to form partnerships, to finish money transfers, to devise contracts, to figure out how partnerships would actually work. Over the last 6 months, I've had the opportunity to actually run something or to be in charge of something, which is to be the graduate program director here at McGill in the Department of History and Classical Studies, of which I'm very proud. And it's very difficult, it's very rewarding, and it's given me an entirely new perspective on how difficult it is to make institutional initiatives happen, how difficult it is to bring institutions, even when they're very complementary, together. So I apologize just in general to the world for having had that experience of 12 and a half years and for not realizing how difficult it is to run things. And with that in mind, I would like to offer a sincere thank you, not a perfunctory or a kind of official thank you, both to personnel at the museums and at McGill. So in no particular order, thanks to Alex Benet, Christina Lucas, Monique Horth, Sandra Corbet, and David Suden at the museums. And at McGill, Matali Das, Franca Cianci, Greet Vankerbergen, Connie Giuseppe, David Wright, Nicholas Dew, Layla Parsons, Kate Deverat, and others who have supported this effort over the last several months. A sincere thank you as well to the doctoral students, some of whom are with us today, who have been helping us over the last several months. So I'm just going to say two things. The first is a word about why we at McGill and in the history department and its allied institutions are going to be good at this and can help. And then secondly, and more broadly, why it is that history and science should be better friends. So first about McGill, in the Department of History and Classical Studies at McGill. We have been teaching history and the history of Canada at McGill, one of the oldest and largest institutions of departments of history in Canada. And we have particular strengths in history of science and history of medicine. At any given time, depending on how you count, we have 10 or so faculty members and postdocs working on and studying the history of Canada. And this is not even to mention the McGill's Institute for the Study of Canada, which is an interdisciplinary institution, a group at which many of our faculty members regularly participate. This is in addition to our many PhD students who are working on the history of Canada, and an even greater number of master's students working on the history of Canada. Put this together, and this is a very large department with extreme strengths, traditional strengths, and growing strengths in the history of Canada writ large, and especially in the history of science. Both because of our department and in allied institutions and programs, and in history of medicine, whether through the social studies of medicine or the Institute for Health and Social Policy. Our current chair, David Wright, is in fact joint appointed in the Department of History and Classical Studies in the Faculty of Arts and the Institute for Health and Social Policy in the Faculty of Medicine. So I guess what I'm saying is we're good at this. We have deep institutional knowledge and a history of teaching history of science and medicine. And we have a lot to offer the museums, I think, and museums will be very helpful to us. Our fellows, now and hopefully in the future, or certainly in the future, will use the materials at the museums, and they will use them well, they'll use them correctly, they will use them creatively, and they will use those materials to broaden the exposure both of the institution, of the museums, and of McGill. Last, let me just say a more general word about what history has to offer science and vice versa, or why history and science ought to be better friends, or actually are already better friends than they think that they are. Before I say this, though, I want to say that it is important for me to note, or to argue, that knowledge of any kind should not need to defend itself, really at all. The pursuit of knowledge is inherently valuable. The pursuit of facts, the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of data, and everything in between needs no justification, and it should transcend any form of market derivation or market share. Any institution or any society or any nation that purports to be or that wants to be, that aspires to be, you can choose your adjective, enlightened, democratic, progressive, or just, needs to assert that. That being said, some disciplines and some pursuits are especially relevant to and helpful for each other, and I actually think that history and science have more natural partnerships than they perhaps think that they do. On the first hand, history and science actually share an intellectual method. Both of these disciplines are accretive, that is, they build on prior research in a more self-conscious way than many other disciplines do. To use an archaeological metaphor, they build upon certain sites, and they rest upon the shoulders of immediate researchers previous to them. In history, we call this historiography, but however you want to describe it, it's the same process in science and in history. More broadly, history and science are both about linking up particulars and making distinctions. They're about finding the most relevant bits of information and then subjecting them to rigorous criticism, scrutiny, hypotheses, arguments, experimentation. At a more concrete level, the study of the world through time and the study of the world historically has always, or should always, inform scientific discovery while hopefully also giving it a deeper form of humanistic purpose. Let me just take one example from one that I know well in my own field of early American history. For millennia, for generations, and many generations, one of the greatest terrors of people of the world, of parents, of children, was smallpox. And in the Western world, the modern study of how to treat smallpox, the modern study of how to prevent smallpox, dates from the early 18th century in a series of complex transfers of knowledge from the Ottoman Empire, itself probably from China, to Europe, most especially to England, to London. The kind of anecdotal story is that an English gentlewoman in 1720 traveled to the Ottoman Empire, admired the clear skin of women she saw there, and learned about the process known as variolation, which is a kind of precursor to vaccination. It's actually a much broader story about how scientific knowledge, medical knowledge, was imbued with and combined with historical knowledge of the East as it was known, and how over various periods of time, through a number of different institutions and intellectuals, the knowledge of how to combat smallpox and the historical possibility of eradicating smallpox came to hold an important place in Western history, in English history, and then in American history. To take one example, it appears that the ability to variolate, that is to prevent smallpox or to reduce the symptoms of smallpox, was actually crucial to George Washington's Revolutionary Army in 1776, 1777. George Washington, in fact, ordered the entire Continental Army of the nascent United States to be variolated and to be therefore defended against smallpox, which probably allowed the Continental Army to survive and thus the revolutionary movement to survive. South of the border, this gets huge cheers. Here, I guess we'll just have to say that it was an important moment in history and that it was a good thing in general that smallpox, this great scourge of humanity, was eventually eradicated. It was eradicated, as I'm saying here, both because of medical research and medical knowledge and the transfer of that knowledge via the medium of historical study, the study of other places and times, study of people unlike ourselves. I don't want to exaggerate the extent of our partnership here, but we will do our all smart part, I think, to make history and science the partners that they should be. And I look forward to our partnership with museums over the next several years. Thank you.
Alors, Gary, Alex, Fernand, et Professor Opel, a big, big, big thank you for your presentation. A big thank you to McGill University. Now we're going to open the floor for questions. I see a lot of young crowd here. I'm sure you have some questions. They're all looking at each other for people that are on the internet, so they're saying, like, who's going to dare ask one question? We like to pepper our CEO.
Oh, come on.
There is a cash bar after, too. So
All right, well, there's a question. Oh, right here, perfect. I got one person. Excellent. And what is your name?
My name is Nicholas Dew. I was just wondering if you could say more about the fellowship program, because this may be a nice time to tell us more about the program, how many fellowships there are per year, how many years you think it will run. I did already. Yeah, I did.
go ahead.
Yes, I don't know. Well, so for the moment, so we have. I had kind of planned this out as two possible sort of models of fellowship: a short-term fellowship and a long-term fellowship. The idea being that the fellows would be in-house or would spend most of their time, or much of their time during their fellowship in Ottawa, doing the research at the library, to do at least one public presentation during their fellowship. And participate in the public life of the museum when they're there. Hopefully this will also result in a longer-term fellowship. Originally planned that the short-term fellowships would be 3-month periods. Long-term fellowship I'd proposed as 9-month fellowships. So we'll start with our 2 fellows and see where that takes us. But it's basically designed as that way, as either a 3-month or a 9-month stint. We could sort of think about how that would might change later on, but that's how we'll start. I don't know if you want to add or...
No. Yeah, for us, this is the beginning. It's not just a one-time thing. We're going to be looking to grow it. We are going to be looking to bring on scientists as well. So I think your commentary on the combining forces of history and science are very, very appropriate. So we will be looking to bring in biochemists and astronomers and astrophysicists. So So how these things start combining together, sort of the future science combined with the history, is really is what we are, is what we do. And nobody else does that in the country. So as a forum for that dialogue. So this will be the beginning. We'll throw in the scientists as we go through, and then we'll continue to grow the fellowships program over the next few years and see where this takes us.
Question.
Icebreaker, it all just one.
I actually just have a question about one of your exhibits, which as a parent I was really interested in, and that is the, or I guess it's maybe a series of workshops, the idea of failure in experiments. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so we're going to have a children's museum in
Yeah.
the new institution. And, well, a lot of scientific discoveries, I'm speaking to a bunch of historians, you know, sometimes happen by mistake, only happen through a series of failures. I can speak as a parent in part of that answer as well. My daughter is about to be 16 and my son 12, and I just don't think we promote failure enough. And, you know, we took a Steve Jobs, for example, to talk about how many times he's failed in launching, or any entrepreneur will tell you. So science and technology for us is a series of failures that leads to that one sort of breakthrough. And not encouraging failure and trying to hide from it would be bad. So the intent behind the Children's Museum is to provide them a space to fail, try things. You know, here's a challenge, try to fix it. Probably not going to happen, may happen. But then have that right in the heart of the museum, where all these exhibitions are about, you know, the successes that have come from failure. We hope is an environment where youth will be able to come and physically and digitally and intellectually engage in what it means for them to be able to be permitted to fail. Because, you know, if we think at school, for example, you have to have the best grade absolutely possible, and it's a society driven by lack of failure, but at the same time, failure is usually what gives us the success. So it's this weird thing going on.
I really commend that. I think that is an amazing idea. As
Wasn't
a parent.
mine. I can't take credit for it.
And I'll
But
be,
yeah.
you know, hoping to bring my kid to it, maybe.
You absolutely. You'll get an invite.
Thank you. Any more questions or volunteers? Oh, there we have another one. This is fantastic. This is a nice crowd.
As a parent, I was actually quite curious about the video games. How does that
Depends
work?
what side of the equation you
No, I'm not playing them. I'm watching
Okay.
other people play them. Are you using them for outreach to people who would not normally be in a museum, and how is that functioning? It sounds like a really interesting idea for a museum to be working on video games.
Yeah, you're striking a chord for me personally. If you're in Ottawa, there's a lot of talk about our location not being downtown Ottawa. And for me, a museum in today's world is about being global, because no matter what you do now, it's globally interconnected. And while the physical experiment and the physical experience is important, and we're not denying that, being able to reach a child in Iqaluit, you know, if you look at our second video game iteration, Black Flight, a lot of our downloads are coming from China, right? A lot in Canada as well, but a lot in China. So Canada has a role to play. We have a role to play to get our culture out there in that world. And if we don't do that, then the risk is that our children, my children, are growing up on a Google and Facebook culture that may or may not contain Canadian content. Getting content out in that world, for me, is extremely personally important. Video games is one facet. We have, for example, 2 weeks ago, we are the first public institution in Canada to remove our firewalls systematically. So as we create draft documents, draft ideas, it will be out there in the world for commentary, for collaboration. So we are a public knowledge institution. It's taxpayers' dollars at work. The knowledge that we generate, that we sit on, that we create, belongs to the public. So for us, we're in that sort of vein of thinking, is getting it all out there as soon as possible, letting researchers, journalists, exhibition designers deal with our content as it is created, because then if we have 10 people contributing to this process, we're adding value. Gaming is the same, gamification is the same context. So if my youth is going to play a video game, that's why I love Minecraft. It's actually helping them, it's teaching them. So we want to educate them, but we want the history lesson to come out. So Black Flight is an example of how we can take 5 Canadian pilots that would otherwise, unfortunately, because they're not an easy company and they're not on HBO, probably not as known because it's Canada and we're south of the border of a massive media giant, this is a way for us to sort of equal the playing field a little bit. So 175 countries in 2+ months, getting the story of 5 Canadian pilots that is historically accurate at 100%. The rivets are 100% accurate on the 3D model. For us, is just a way of getting Canadian content out in that spectrum and getting known as, you know, a great nation that has contributed to world history. In World War I, we were very significant players in that space, and Black Flight, that unit, was a significant player as well. So now we got the story out. And since we know a lot of youth play video games, then we might as well talk to them in their world, in their language as well, and that's one example, right? So that's the sort of the theory or the thinking behind it. We're going to launch probably another 3 or 4 more in the next few years. The next iteration of ACE Academy should be a partnership with a few European countries. That's the target anyways. See what happens. But that's certainly the intent and the theory behind it, is merging historical accuracy. Our curator, or assistant curator, Aaron Gregory at the Aviation Space Museum, spent a lot of time researching this game to make sure it's 100% accurate. So you're actually fighting the real battles that were fought, you know, in World War I. So it's, for us, it's a fantastic merger of past, present, future, all of the above.
It's really exciting.
It wasn't my idea either. Right? I'm on a roll. Actually, this is Fern's idea, Fern's baby in part, so a few years ago. So well done, Fern.
And, oh, finally, somebody from the younger crowd.
Yeah, that side of the crowd is sort of
Finally.
dominating.
I'm interested in the traveling exhibits. If you could talk a little more about those. Are they going to be exhibits from the museum, or are you helping to showcase exhibits from around Canada and help those travel?
Yeah. Mostly they're self-produced in our case. But if you look at Star Trek, for example, since we're the global launch, you know, we've been helping to produce that. We've been helping to find locations. It'll be going to Calgary, for example, after us. So there's some collaboration that happens across Canada on traveling exhibitions. Some of the ones we're launching are a mixture of both, I would say. But again, like, we have the privilege in science and speaking, I mean, it's a running joke, but from cows to Canadarm and everything in between at the museum. So it's pretty wide subject area. So we have about, I would say, in the next few years, we'll have close to a dozen of these shows on the road, crisscrossing across the country at any point in time. But again, our challenge is balancing our shows that we want to produce and in partnership with others, but also looking at digital, looking at documentaries now that, you know, Canada is a very economic place to produce science and technology documentaries, as it turns out, and we have not leveraged that as an institution. We're about to start that. So for us, it's a mixture of both. So it's a mixture of our traveling exhibitions, a mixture of digital, because you can't, it's just not one experience anymore. And if we pride ourselves in engaging youth, we have to do that, because that's typically where they live first, much to my chagrin sometimes. But for us, yeah, that's sort of the strategy. So a lot of our Taste of Science, for example, is crisscrossing across Saskatchewan, Manitoba right now, I believe, or it's in London, Ontario, and it's scheduled to go out west. Game Changers will launch in Sudbury with the Science North Science Center, for example. So it really becomes a blended mixture, typically Canadian in that sense, I guess, actually. Very collaborative, collegial.
All right. Well, we've actually did very well. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to McGill for hosting us. Un gros merci à l'Université de McGill pour avoir été notre hôte aujourd'hui. This actually adjourns our public annual meeting. Alors, cela termine notre réunion publique annuelle. Thank you very much, everybody. As you know, there's actually some drinks, cash bar at the back, as well as some food. And for those that actually were talking about the sort of exhibits that we do in terms of, you have little pamphlets here, information. You also have some nice little USB drive, if you'd like, with the technoscience.ca, where you can actually find us on the internet. And of course, we encourage you to follow us on social media. We do tons of very, very cool stuff. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.